Good afternoon, Saitlanders. How are you? I want to run my hand through my hair. Oh, there we go. I've got it. Gee, for once. I get the mirror thing baffles me. US bank failures. 3 over the past 5 days. The first one being a small bank, the second one being of the 16th largest in the USA, and also the largest in its field, namely an issuer of loans to startup IT tech, AI, what type of companies. That's Silicon Valley Bank. And then we've just heard, well, when I say just heard, as in today, Monday, the 13th of March, although I suspect that I'll post this video tomorrow, that yesterday, American time, Sunday, so, whatever, 3 in the morning in South Africa, 2 in the morning, whatever, another bank called Signature Bank was shut down by the regulators. And I've just held a conversation with a very good friend of Saitlanders whose father is the financial director of 3 banks. Also a good friend of Saitlanders. Not a close friend necessarily, but I'd like to believe that his dad is a good friend of Saitlanders. And the old man reckons that the irony of this is that for the past year, the man is, oh no, I'm just going to mess this up. He's in his 60s. He might be just turned 60, could be 64, but he's not yet retired, and I think he's 60-ish. He says that in his career, he has never known the financial regulatory authority to have been so difficult to deal with, as in, I'm trying to think of the right words, and the expressions that my friend used were just strongly worded. So I can't repeat them, or I don't want to repeat them in this video. They were so difficult in his whole career, as in this past year. So the irony is that the regulatory authorities are on the ball. They're doing their jobs. They're doing their jobs too well and too much. They're a pain in the neck of the banks, as never before. And yet, in spite of that, we've had 3 bank failures in 3 days. The first one was a very small bank, or a small bank. So I don't want to exaggerate, make it sound like, 3 Wall Street banks. That's not the case. But still, 3 bank failures in 5 days. He reckons that there may be a cascade effect, but it's too difficult to tell as yet. Now, let me tell you what caused it. Over the past few years, the United States of America has printed quite a lot of money, particularly in Donald Trump's presidency. In Donald Trump's 4 years as president, their cycle is 4 years. Ours in South Africa is 5 years. He printed more money than any president in history, adjusted for inflation, end of story, far more. Nobody to touch him. He was a spendthrift. A profligate spendthrift. And that has continued under Joe Biden. That superabundance of money has led to interest rates falling very low. The low interest rates combined with the superabundance of money has led to, or the two together have led to, an increase in prices, usually referred to on SREK, on Radio 5 FM, on Goede Hoop Radio, you name it, as inflation, although technically it is not inflation. It is, however, very often a great symptom of inflation, so perhaps I'm being a bit, perhaps I should be more lenient about the use of the term inflation. But it's actually an increase in prices. Now, that increase in prices started to get out of hand. At one point in time, 2 years ago, the average house price increase in the USA, average, was 20-point-something% over a year. A 20% increase in house prices over a year. In fact, I think it was accommodation prices. So whether you owned, rented, whatever, I don't remember. But there was a period when it was frightening, year on year, over a few months. And food prices, we know this from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, increased in October of last year, vegetables. The Bureau of Labor Statistics revealed in whatever it was, oh, hang on, I've got a dog attacking a bird. Whoa, 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 whoa. This is a 10-week-old Belgian Malinois bitch, and she is enormous. She was 10 weeks yesterday. You know, the Malinois are supposed to be a lighter version of German Shepherds. But her father, who's a very prestigious, comes out of a good line, fancy schmancy, cost the earth dog, was big. He was just big. And she is just big. She's, you know, in female terms and in Malinois terms, she's an Amazon giant. She's an Amazon as a female and a giant as a Malinois. Anyway, she just attacked my very nice rooster, but he seems to have gotten away with his life. There, look at the camera. If anybody ever warns you against getting a Malinois, listen carefully to what they say. Hear them. Don't dismiss them. They are very intelligent, but like an intelligent child, you have to stimulate them. You can't treat them normally. It doesn't work that way. Come here, Mampara. And for some reason or other, I don't know what it is, I haven't discovered, but the toilet training, house training, is very difficult with them. There's something inside of them that resists learning not to use the domicilium, the domicile, the house, as a toilet. Very poor compared to other dogs. Anyway, there you go. So that's why I had to interrupt the video. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting a call from overseas. That was for an interview, but I knew that he had some latitude. It's not like it's streaming live or something like that. Anyway, so back to the point. These prices increased. I was telling you that in October, the price of vegetables in the USA rose by 38.5%. Phenomenal, mind-bending. And I've told you in another video that I phoned a friend of ours in the USA and said to them, could this be true? And they said to me, look, to be honest, I don't know. I don't count, I don't check the prices. As it happens, a wealthy person who is also a bachelor. A bachelor with money is just not the way it works. However, he said, however, I wouldn't be surprised because the prices that I am aware of around me are going through the roof. And he gave me some examples of things with which he is familiar, with which he deals every day. So that's not just a theoretical anecdote, it's real. So, the Federal Reserve Bank, in an effort to tame inflation, has been implementing increases in interest rates. Now you can imagine for yourself, the likelihood of you borrowing money when you have to pay it back at 30% interest rate is far lower than the likelihood of you borrowing money when the person you borrow it from says to you, you don't have to pay me any interest. Pay me in 10 years, no interest. How much can I have? Because it's the interest that cripples. As it says in, I think, the Wisdom of Solomon in the Bible. If you borrow at interest, you shall become a slave. And that's why usury, the charging of interest, was illegal in Christendom forever until a couple of hundred years ago. Less. It was illegal. You went to jail if you charged another man interest on a loan. And then it became excessive interest, and then it became, and now you can charge almost anything, realistically, you know. So, when they started to increase the interest rate, some people, everything is a cycle. You know, I'm dependent upon Mr. Miller for my job, and my children are dependent upon me for their school fees, and the teachers are dependent upon the school for the management of those fees, and those parents, those teachers, children's schooling, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on, and the Pick and Pay and the Woolworths and the Spar and the ShopRite. So when you increase interest rates, you necessarily restrain inflation. You restrain the ability of people to spend freely, which means that you restrain the ability of goods and service providers to charge whatever they like, to charge freely. So it puts a dampener on everything. And one of the knock-on effects is that the banks in the USA are finding trading conditions extremely difficult from the time that the interest rates under Donald Trump were at less than 1%. At one point, there were many interest rates that were negative. In other words, if you borrowed €1 million for a house, a nice house, you would pay back less than you borrowed. Negative interest rates, minus 1%. And the system has not been able to adjust. It's like smoking or drinking or heroin, God forbid, eating lots of bread, eating cakes and sweets and cokes and whatever. Getting off it is not easy. And getting off the free money has proved to be very difficult for the US consumer. But in this instance, we're not talking about the poor consumer who's getting hammered to death. We're talking about the banks. The banks can't cope with the increases in interest rates, the changes in trading circumstances. And that's what has led to this. However, if the Fed pivots, pivots, and goes the other way, and brings interest rates down again, and makes it easy for people to get into debt again, then you sit with the other problem of the increase in prices. So that Federal Reserve banks, not that they're federal. I've explained to you before that the Federal Reserve banks, the 12 banks, are owned by 8 families, 4 of which are European, and the other 4 are one of them. One of the 8 families is a kind of a WASP. You remember that expression? It was very common in the 80s and 90s, and 20 years ago. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. One of the families is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant from the USA. The other 7 are not. Ethnic Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They're outsiders. Or not of the core of the identity of the USA, of the largest part. We were talking about the owners of the Fed. I've lost my train of thought, but it doesn't matter. The long and the short of it is, that's right. The Federal Reserve Bank's system is now caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. And they don't know what to do. And they're hesitating. And he who hesitates is lost. So there's a lot of contrary, invective, polemic flying around YouTube. Is Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank system, is he too weak or is he too strong? Is he moving too dramatically or is he moving like a tortoise? There are contrary opinions. Some people want not necessarily inflation, but they're willing to have high inflation if they can get their hands on lots of money for bakshi, for mahala, or next to mahala. Other people don't want that at all. They don't want inflation. They don't care if nobody's got any money. We can cut our coats to suit our cloth, as my mother would say. If you've only got this much, that's what you have to live with. So, if he moves the one way, it's going to be very bad for the American consumer. Because at the end of the day, it is always the consumer who pays the price. Think of VAT, for example. We're not talking about VAT, but it illustrates this principle. If I have a business, a rubber plantation, if I'm a rubber plantation farmer, I have to pay VAT on the value added. It's a value added tax. So my inputs are this, my output is that, I pay on the output. And I claim back. I sell the rubber to Goodyear, Firestone, Dunlop. They pay value added tax and they claim back. They sell the tires to an African National Congress, a wife of a minister who has, the wife has a catering company, and she also supplies tires to the Mercedes Benzes of the ministers, the cars of that ministry. She pays VAT and she claims back. And so it works with everything, except the consumer. If you cut out if you change the analogy and you say beans, the beans go from this one to that one to that, and I eventually eat the beans, how do I claim the VAT back? I pay 17%. At the end of the day, it's always the consumer that carries the baby. It's always the consumer that cannot pass the buck. So either the consumer gets crucified by inflation, or the system gets crucified by interest rates, in which case the consumer also gets crucified because it gets passed on. As I was making that analogy, I was realizing that it's not strictly true. It's not that the one gets crucified or the other. It's either the one or both. But yeah, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There are big events happening in the USA. This could turn out to be a phenomenal crisis. It really could. It really could turn out to be something very severe. If there's a run on banks, we've had 3 in 5 days. If we've had 5 by the end of the week in 9 days, and 9 in 20 days, and 30 in 3 months, it's going to be the sign of massive, massive catastrophe. And that is the long and the short of it, if you didn't know how it was working and why it was going that way. It's just about the bank's inability to trade at higher interest rates, because they have to buy money just as we do. They have to pay a price. And it was easy for them to borrow lots of money when it was cheap, and to pay it back now at a different rate is very difficult. Thanks for watching this video. Goodbye. God bless you. Cheerio.